Welcome to the Property Pod, brought to you by Shared Ownership Week. A huge big thank you to Legal and General Affordable Homes. We're currently at East River Wharf Apartments, and if you hear any banging or knocking, that's because there's still building taking place. Now, I'm dying to know more about shared ownership, so my first guest is Nick Lieb from Share to Buy. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, Lucy.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Please help me dissect the subject that is shared ownership, because I believe there's a lot of misconceptions about the subject. So first and foremost, what is shared ownership in a nutshell?
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, shared ownership is a scheme that's designed to help people get onto the property ladder. So the way that it works is that you buy a share of a property and you pay a mortgage on that share, and you pay rent on the remaining share that you don't own to the housing provider, who is typically a housing association or a company like Legal and General Affordable Homes, where we are today.
Okay, amazing. That sounds a lot simpler than I imagined, but I do have quite a lot of questions.
Go for it.
So the idea of sharing makes it sound like you have to share it with somebody else. Can you please just define what it means to
Yeah,
share?
I mean, we hear that all the time. If there's one thing that I would say the biggest misconception about shared ownership is that it means that the share, you've bought a share and some random strangers bought the other share and suddenly you're living in a house together. That's not it at all. The share is literally the share as in the amount of the property, the ownership of the property that you have. So for example, 30%. So you've got a 30% share. On the remaining 70%, which is still owned by the housing provider or the housing association, you're paying the rent on that remaining. So you're the only one in the property, or the only people that get into the property are the people that you invite to come into the property with you. So you're not sharing with anybody else.
Okay, so I'm 31, professional, working full time. Can you please just explain the types of criteria that you need to be able to get shared ownership?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're right in the sort of sweet spot, I would say, for shared ownership. In that you're working full time. Are you renting privately at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah. And so you'll know, to make an assumption that renting is expensive, particularly if you're doing it in London, but generally all around the country now it's expensive to rent, and the rent keeps going higher and higher. What I would say as well, I mean, look, we always get asked questions like, well, why would I want to do shared ownership? I want to buy a property outright. Okay. Now, if you can afford to buy a property outright, then you don't need shared ownership. That's fine. That's not who it's for. It's literally for people that would like to buy a property but can't afford to do so on the open market. They can't find a property that meets their needs on the open market because of the financials that are involved. It's not just for everybody shared ownership. So if you're earning over £80,000 as a household, so that might be you and your partner, or just you as an individual. If you're earning over £80,000 in most parts of the country, or over £90,000 in London, then you're over the limit for how much you can earn to do shared ownership. So there's eligibility criteria to make sure that it's basically going for people who wouldn't be able to buy a property on the open market. So if you've got a joint salary of £130,000, then probably you can afford to buy a property on the open market. You might have to save for a little bit longer, but generally speaking, that's not who shared ownership's for. Shared ownership's for those professionals or people that are, on modest to good incomes, basically.
So what is the process then, and how do you check at Share to Buy? So is it just Share to Buy? Do I go to you and say, this is my situation?
So I work for Share to Buy. Now, we're a property portal, so similar to a Rightmove or a Zoopla that I'm sure you looked on when you were trying to find your rental apartment, but we specifically cater for shared ownership and affordable home ownership options, because there are other ones. Shared ownership is just one of the options, albeit it's the biggest and the sort of most established option. But our website has all of the properties that are available for that scheme on our site. So you can come to ours, you can see all of the different guides that we've got, the tools that we've got, the calculators, etc., etc. It's all specifically designed for people that are in your situation and trying to understand what their options are. So yeah, there are the other places that you can find that information as well. But yeah, Share to Buy, we try and have everything in one place to give you I suppose the education and the information that you need to make that choice about whether shared ownership's right for you.
Amazing, because it can seem a little bit intimidating trying to go into
Sure.
this space. So what is different about the scheme as well that helps welcome people and sort of introduce them to being able to have this as an option?
Yeah, well, I mean, the vast majority of people that do shared ownership are first-time buyers, but they're not exclusively first-time buyers. It can be for people that are downsizing, for people that might have had a relationship breakdown, and so they're buying a second property. But as long as when you do that shared ownership transaction, the previous property that you might have owned, you no longer own, then you can do shared ownership. But as I say, the vast majority of people are first-time buyers, right? So all of the companies that are involved know that as well. And you know that, if you're buying your 10th property, you've done it, you've seen it, you've done it all before, you understand what the process is. If you're a first-time buyer, it all seems scary. It's all the first time you've ever done anything. It's the biggest thing you've ever bought. It's it's a life changer basically, buying a property. So what we try to do on Share to Buy is have all of the information available on the website, but then also when you get into the process, you're speaking to sales professionals that are specifically used to selling shared ownership properties. You're dealing with mortgage brokers that are specialists. You're dealing with solicitors that are specialists. So there's people all along the way of the process to try and hold your hand and get you through it basically.
Amazing. Now, do you have first-hand experience with Share to Buy yourself?
Yeah, so just to clarify, it's shared ownership, not share to buy.
Got it.
So
So,
share to
yeah.
buy is our company. Shared ownership is the name of the way you can buy the property. But yeah, I myself bought a shared ownership property with my partner 7 years ago, and we are actually about to sell that shared ownership property. But it's been an incredibly positive experience for us. Something that I should have mentioned a little bit earlier is that once you're in your shared ownership property, you can actually buy more shares if you want to and you can afford to at the time. So say, for example, you go in at a 30% share, that doesn't mean that you're stuck at 30% forever. If you want to and you can afford to, as I say, then you can potentially staircase all the way to 100%. The process of buying more shares is called staircasing as well. So you can go all the way to 100% if you choose to and you can afford to. Or you can do what we did, which is we've never bought any more shares. We stuck at our 50% that we took originally. But what we have been doing for 7 years is paying the mortgage, which means that month by month, there's been an amount of money that's been going back to us in terms of the equity that we've been building up in the property. So now that we're ready to move on to the next property, we've got 7 years worth of mortgage payments that are kind of coming back to us via the equity of the property. So we now have that deposit to buy on the open market. So there's different ways that people approach living in a shared ownership property. Some people want to go all the way to 100%. Some people are happy to stick at the share that they started off with, or maybe somewhere in between.
So is there a benefit to eventually staircasing if you wanted to?
Yeah, well, once you staircase, the more of the share that you own, the less rent you pay. So it's all, ratioed out basically. So if you can get to 100%, then you're no longer paying rent to the housing association or the housing provider. And at that point, you own the property just like you would any other property that you bought on the open market.
Okay, that does sound quite appealing. Please, can I get an example? So if I wanted to do shared ownership for a property of £300,000, can you just dissect the figures for me?
Yeah, sure. So £300,000, okay, in London, it's probably going to get you maybe like a 1-bed apartment, maybe a 2-bed if you're, going a little bit further out than the central zones. As a buyer, generally speaking, you're going to probably need about 10% deposit for a property. And if a property is worth £300,000, that means you'd need a deposit of £30,000, which, if you're paying rent and you've got other outgoings, can be really difficult to try and save up. With shared ownership, it helps because it makes that entry to the market a lot lower. So basically what I mean by that is the deposit that you need is just on the share that you're buying. So say, for example, you've got that £300,000 property and you're buying a 30% share, let's say. So the value of the share that you're buying is £90,000. So if you need a 10% deposit on £90,000, that's £9,000. With shared ownership as well, you often get mortgage deals that are available for 5% deposits. So that might be £4,500. As a first-time buyer or somebody that wants to get into shared ownership, to save up £4,500 or save up £9,000 is probably a lot more achievable than saving up £30,000 that you would need if you're buying on the open market. So once you're in the property, you've got your monthly costs, okay? So you'll be paying a mortgage on the share that you've bought, and you'll be paying rent to the housing provider on the share that you haven't bought. There might also be service charge depending on what sort of property that you live in. Now, those costs can be kind of the equivalent of the costs that are on the open market. Sometimes it can be a bit lower, sometimes it can be a bit higher. It really just depends how much of the share you're buying, what the rent costs are at that time, etc., etc. But where shared ownership really helps, and probably the situation that you're in and thousands of other people are in, is that actually paying that monthly cost isn't the issue. It's the deposit that's the issue. And so shared ownership just makes it so much easier because the amount that you need for that deposit is a lot less than if you were buying on the open market.
Incredible. So if I started this process today, roughly how long would it take if I had the deposit ready
Yeah,
in
if you had
place?
the deposit ready and you found a property, so there's, again, you could go to sharetobuy.com to find that property, and there's new build properties out there. So where we are today, this is a new build development that's currently in the works. So if you can hear anything, that's where it's coming from. Or you can buy resale property, which means it's a shared ownership property that somebody has bought previously and they're now selling. So they haven't staircased to 100%, so it's still a shared ownership property. So there's new build and there's resales. Once you found the property, um, the rough average is around about 3 months between you reserving the property and moving in. But really, there's variations within that depending on whether the person that you're buying from, if it's a resale, is in a chain, or whether the development that you're buying is actually whether you've bought off plan or whether you've bought when the development's ready. So there's various different things that can impact how long it takes. But generally speaking, if everything's good to go, you're looking at about 3 months.
So you're telling me if I put a deposit down today, this could be mine.
This could be yours. This could be yours. Yeah.
As someone who travels around quite a lot, I'm always looking for that certain sense of stability.
Yeah.
And I think now is a time where I'm trying to think what is home. Rentals always feel temporary.
Yeah.
There's nothing secure necessarily, I feel, about renting.
Yeah.
So this is quite an interesting space.
I mean, when I was in my 20s, I moved rentals on average every 6 months for about 5 years. And I mean, it's good because you whittle your possessions down to pretty much the clothes on your back. So when you do move, it's quite easy to do so. Whereas now when I'm moving after 7 years, we've got 2 bloody lorries worth of stuff to move. But yeah, you're right. It's really nice to just put down roots every now and again and yeah, have that security net, I think.
Yeah, and growth. So are you moving to another shared ownership property?
No, you can do that. You can move from one shared ownership property to another, particularly if, say, for example, the shared ownership property you bought was a one bed, and then your life's changed since then, and you've maybe had another child. You've had a child. In that case, there are ways that you can go to another shared ownership property. But no, for me, what we're doing is we've, as I say, we've been in there for 7 years. We've been paying the mortgage on a monthly basis, so we've now got enough money as a deposit for a property on the open market. So we're also moving out of London, so we're relocating. So yeah, we'll be buying eventually on the open market.
And you can do shared ownership around the UK?
Yeah. Shared ownerships are nationwide. Well, I say the UK, it's England. I think there's various different other schemes in the other countries of the UK. But yeah, shared ownership and share to buy, we're focused on England. But yeah, it's available. There's properties and schemes and developments and homes available all over the country for shared ownership. Some areas where there's more, as you'd expect, the cities and the sort of affordability hotspots, that tends to be more of a need for shared ownership. But it also changes. So depending on where you are in the country, the type of shared ownership properties that are available change. So in London, there's a lot of apartments. There are some townhouses as well, but there's a lot of apartments. Whereas you get further out and you get into other parts of the country, and it tends to be more houses than apartments. But generally speaking, there'll be a bit of a mix.
Nick, thank you. This has been really interesting for me to be able to speak to you directly. Now, how can other people find out more, not just online?
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to your question earlier about, as a first-time buyer, how can you be helped along the process? So we've run an event for 10 years, actually, called the London Home Show. And the next one's coming up in September. Now, the London Home Show is kind of the Share to Buy portal made in person. So we have all the different housing providers there. We have experts like solicitors, mortgage brokers. We have technology firms there that have got apps for first-time buyers and ways that they can, help first-time buyers save more money. We do talks, so there's a wide variety of different talks happening over the course of the day for people to get information and ask their questions to the experts. It's free to attend. It's in Westminster on the 23rd of September. So if you're in London and you're looking to get on the housing ladder or interested in shared ownership, then we could definitely recommend coming to the London Home Show.
That sounds brilliant. And the fact that it's free and open to anybody to come along to.
Yeah, you have to register in advance though.
Okay.
So go to the Share to Buy website to do so.
Make sure I do that. Do you have any tips? What would be your one big tip for someone about to do shared ownership?
Yeah, I think while you're in the process, what I would say is just research, and don't feel shy about reaching out and asking a question to the experts. That's what they're there for. Nobody's expecting you to become an expert by yourself. There's specialist companies out there that are it's their remit to help people who are trying to buy shared ownership. So yeah, my biggest tip really would be just do your research, take your time, and speak to the experts.
Thank you. It feels really reassuring. It does, because it is a very daunting area, but actually there's something quite proud you can have about the process, from what I've learned from you anyway. Now, tell me, Nick, what is the cheapest deposit I could possibly need to stay in the city?
There are properties available in London via shared ownership that you can buy with a deposit of less than £5,000.
You're kidding me.
And if you compare that to the open market, where you might need a minimum deposit of 20, 30, even £40,000, you can really see the benefits of the shared ownership scheme that way.
Definitely. What is one thing about shared ownership that could surprise people?
Well, shared ownership is actually over 40 years old. It was introduced in 1980, so it's been around for decades. It's older than me, it's certainly older than you, and it's helped thousands of people get onto the property ladder around the country in that time.
And the idea of home, just to finish off with, how do you personally define what a home is?
Yeah, well, home, it's an interesting question for me at the minute, because as I mentioned, I'm actually moving at the moment, but our home for the last 7 years has been the property that we mentioned earlier, and having that foundation really is probably what I would say home means to me. It's just having the foundation that, once you've got your house settled, once you've got your home settled, you can it's the building block for the rest of your life, I feel, really. And when we moved into our shared ownership property, that was really kind of the catalyst for the past few years, really, of us kind of growing and becoming adults, I would say.
I love that because I'm like dying for that feeling.
Yeah.
I feel like in rentals, I'm not getting that sense of security or growth as a person. So now that you've told me, I'll get that with a
Yeah,
shared
I
ownership
mean,
property.
you can still buy a shared ownership property and not have any growth as a person. That's absolutely fine. Or you might have already grown as a person before you do shared ownership. So that's not in the lease or anything that you will grow as a person. But
Just me personally.
yeah, and me personally too. It's definitely been a help. Yeah, because I was doing the whole house share, and generally speaking, kind of moving further and further out of the part of London that I wanted to live in. We've now got a shared ownership property in Forest Hill, which is zone 3 in London. It's a nice area where we wanted to live, and it's a property that we would never have been able to get if we were trying to do it on the open market. So yeah, shared ownership was perfect for us.
Thank you so much, Nick. I have really loved learning more about shared ownership. Now, please visit the Shared Ownership Week website where you can also find out more. A huge big thank you to all our partners, and I look forward to seeing you at the London Home Show.